Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I think it's a privilege to be present in such a group of economists who are critical of the European Union and the Eurozone and a lot of things which are going on in Brussels without being consulted on a broader scale. I have a few comments to make in two parts. First, a few comments about the European Union itself, and then a few comments on the Eurozone and the Euro itself. But very first, and I would say that my remarks could sound very harsh, but probably it is still not as harsh as the reality is at the moment in Europe regarding the economy and monetary affairs. Now, before delivering this very brief expose, I would like to mention one example to illustrate how essential it is for a country's well-being, the background where the country works and the international circumstances. Before the Second World War, in 1939, which was the last year when Austria still existed as an independent state, the League of Nations statistics published, as usually as the EU publishes, in the statistics in 1938. It was mentioned, and anybody can read that the level of living, standard of living in Hungary and in Austria was very much the same. In Austria it was about 8% higher than in Hungary. Now that is a tremendous example. It shows that when a country left on its own devices, but not interfered with from hostile or other less friendly elements, then a country can produce significant economic results. And also, we lost the war. We were in Hungary dismembered, and yet we were able to maintain a standard of living almost as much as Austria. And now comes the point. And when when Soviet occupation was over in 1990, the standard of living of Hungary was down to 30% of the Austrian. 30%, again, official statistics. And now we are maybe 35 or 40%, maybe. But still a far cry from the near equality what we had in 1938. That shows the tremendous destructive power of the environment a country can be in. It could destroy the capacities, the energies, everything. I think these figures should be taught everywhere to illustrate that the economic result of a country, to what extent depends on the environment in which the country operates, or if the country is left alone and then not interfered with for whatever reason. So that's what I wanted to mention. And coming to the point, as I said, some very harsh comments, but there's an American saying that if the news are bad, please don't shoot the messenger. So I would like to refer to this saying that you shouldn't be angry with me if the message is harsh. It is the realities which are harsh. Now, European Union. We know the history, how it came about. At first it was quite an innocent union of steel and coal, etc., etc. So, but then, as the time went on, the nature of the common market, as it was, changed significantly. And the most significant change, of course, happened in 1990 after German unification and the liberation of Central Europe from Russian occupation. But in spite of the various periods which were very visible in the history of the European Union, it is pretty obvious and difficult to dispute that the European Union, particularly as built on the common market, has been built on hypocrisy and deceit and greed. Of course, we hear lots of sanctimonious statements about common Europe, competitiveness, convergence, and so on. But there is not a word, not in the Maastricht Treaty, in Lisbon Treaty, nowhere, about the common and equal prosperity for all of the Union. No, this is not a common prosperity area. It is an area where some countries prosper and some go bankrupt, as we see it, for instance, in the case of Greece, not only Greece. So, I think that the one main problem with the European Union has been for decades this lack of sincerity about the facts and the purposes. And the EU has been prospering for a few, the big countries, so to say, but it meant misery for many of the new and smaller countries, Hungary included, unfortunately. Now, and actually, what happened after 1990, when the countries of Central Europe became free and independent again, then what happened was really an economic occupation of Central Europe by some major economic powers, part of the European Union. And actually, if you look at the economic landscape of these countries, you could see that most of the companies are there French, German, some British, maybe some Italian, and very few of the local companies or businesses, because they have been destroyed in the process. So that was the big change. That was the big change. And then, of course, all this happened under a very attractive-looking theoretical slogan, the free movement of goods, money, and services. Yes, free movement. But there was never a country in the world which would have prospered under that theory, free movement, because the United States, for instance, which was a small continent, and another, had the highest customs duties, for instance, for decades. That is how the United States became a big power. Even England, which is supposed to be the origin of free trade, under Cromwell, they introduced very harsh, strict navigation laws, for instance, which was a really significant contribution to the prosperity of Britain at that time. So, free movement of money and goods really never existed. If and ever existed, it was only for the benefit of some major countries. That is why, if you look at the history books, it's always a major country which is promoting these ideas, because they benefit from it. Now, one example of the of the hypocrisy of the European Union, the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy. It is a clear discrimination against Central Europe, and it has probably very little to do with the idea of a free market. One can even ask, is the CAP European solidarity a la French style? The CAP is, I think everyone knows what CAP is. I don't go into details. The subsidy for the agricultural growers in the member countries, but the original countries, the growers in the original countries like Germany, France, and Netherlands, their subsidy even today is almost twice as high as the subsidy which comes to the growers in Central Europe. That is a terrible disparity which is gradually being worked out, but already now President Sarkozy made a statement a few months ago saying that when CAP will be reviewed, France will insist having special subsidies again. So that is so much for French solidarity about Europe. And CAP is really dumping, because with the subsidy, with the extra subsidy, French, some Dutch, maybe some German agricultural products can be dumped in Central Europe, destroying the previously flourishing agriculture in those countries. And dumping, of course, is forbidden by the World Trade Organization. And I think it might be time for sometimes even to sue the European Union at the WTO on the basis of dumping the CAP. And then further behind, the agricultural standards. Again, the European Union head office, the Brussels bureaucrats, are imposing all kinds of specific standards and rules on industry, but I'm speaking of agriculture, which only has one aim: to make agricultural production impossible in Central Europe. And of course, we see the results. For instance, in Hungary, up until the entering of Hungary to the European Union, the number of pigs was close to 10 million. Now, less than 4 million, because of the discriminatory practices of the European Union. And this is just one example. Now, finally, about the European Union. The European Union also is authorized to conclude trade agreements with third parties like China, Brazil, and others. Now, the agreement with Brazil was particularly destructive for the European agriculture, specifically sugar producers. What was the agreement? It was a few years ago. The EU built quite a few, probably French or German companies, were building sugar factories in Brazil, and in return, Brazil had the freedom, duty-free, export sugar to the European Union member countries. And that seems to be a good idea, and of course it was very good for those companies which were building the sugar factories in Brazil. But those factories were very unique. Actually, some experts say that even with a switch of a button, those sugar factories can produce either sugar or ethanol or biofuel, just by switching almost. So, and now what happened? Well, now the biodiesel is so popular, the Brazilian farmers decided to produce biodiesel instead of sugar. So came the sugar crisis in Europe early this year. So that is an outrageous arrangement. And this is just one example how...
Sorry, ethanol, not biodiesel.
Sorry?
The Brazilians produce ethanol.
I don't hear.
Ethanol.
Ethanol, yes. I was sure, I wasn't sure. Thank you. So, but this is one example that the EU is authorized to destroy significant branches of economy by concluding such disastrous agreements. And about China, the same. Some West European machine industry benefited by having free access to China, but in return, China demanded and received free access of Chinese textile and other goods to Europe. As a result, the light industry in the European Union is practically destroyed, not only in Hungary, everywhere. So that was again an agreement which benefited very well for the machine tool industry, car industry, and some others. But it was by sacrificing the light industry in the European Union. So no wonder that people are getting more and more critical and upset about the policy of the European Union. And we can hear that there are critical voices from Finland to France, Hungary, the Netherlands, and of course there were always very critical views in Britain, and now also in Greece and Ireland. That is quite logical, and one could have foreseen this, because if a policy is not in the service of the people, then that is what happens. Destruction, and people who are being destroyed try to defend themselves. So, to conclude this part of my brief remarks, we indeed need a united Europe, but it should be built on true equal chances for the prosperity of all. We should get rid of the state jacket of Brussels, and then if there is a true economic freedom for all, then probably people will be a lot happier with the idea of a common Europe. Now, a few comments about the Euro. 5 minutes?
5.
Okay.
6.
Now, the Euro, as probably everyone knows, was basically a French idea against the German mark. A political concept without any true economic elaboration of what the consequence could be. And of course, that was also related to German unification and so on. So it was not a concept which was truly worked out after many years of economic research and analysis. No, it was a political decision. This is what I realized. And now we see the result. No surprise, no surprise. Some economists already at that time mentioned the possible disaster coming, but politicians who at that time were deciding about the euro ignored those remarks because from their point of view, their political interests dictated to ignore all those huge remarks. And anyway, as De Gaulle once said, après moi le déluge, after me the deluge. So those who decided about the euro, they have gone, and who they did not care what happens 20 years later. Now, here we are now. And then the euro has been into being gradually. And actually, a common currency would be desirable but only with a proper economic structure to support it. And I was just explaining briefly how how not appropriate the current structure of the European Union is for anything which function properly economically. So the euro is missing a proper economic undercarriage to work on. The euro is somewhat an abstract idea for the banks, for the financial market, and for the monetary arrangements, but totally irrelevant from the point of view of the real economy. And that is the cause of all the problems. Now, actually already the beginning of the euro was ominous. I would like to remind those who maybe do not know that when the euro was established, at that time the so-called Maastricht criteria were firmly declared: the 3% budget deficit, the 60% of the maximum indebtedness of the government, etc. Now, the surprise is that already at that time, when they were signing the treaty, the 3% budget deficit was not kept by neither France nor Germany, not Italy. Now, not to mention the 60% criteria. Do you know that at that time, when Italy signed the Euro Treaty, the total budget deficit of Italy was around 110% of the GDP. 110%. And the requirement was 60%. And also for Greece, it was about 80%. So how could we expect something functioning properly when already at the very beginning there was full of cheating and promises that yes, now it is, but it will improve. That because the Italians said, as of the Greek too, that yes, now it is like that, but within X number of years we shall come down to 60%. Well, you know they are not worse than ever. So that was a very, very ominous beginning, and the most surprised that we are where we are now. And the world financial crisis in 2007 and 2008 has revealed the dark side of the European banking, which is now based on Europe. It became obvious or known that billions of bad debts have been lent in the European banks, and then happened the bailout of banks with taxpayer money in Britain, in Ireland, Germany, Belgium. And what is also significant, the financial crisis revealed the true debt burden of the governments in the Eurozone and in general in the European Union. Because up until that time, Brussels really has hidden the true figures concerning the real indebtedness of the governments. Now, after the financial crisis, there was no way to hide and cheat on these figures anymore. So indebtedness has been revealed to the extent of which, and only in a few sentences, I would like to raise one issue, question rather, that why is it that Europe has been, and also the United States too, but Europe has been so much indebted in 10, 20 years? Now the answer is the new banking technique which was introduced after the Second World War but became more widespread in the 1970s. It is fractional banking. Now fractional banking is the main culprit of all the indebtedness. Fractional banking means that contrary to the previous banking practices for centuries, a bank could lend out a lot more than it takes in as deposit. Actually, just of the approximate figure, a bank by and large can lend out almost 10 times, it depends on the reserve, 8 to 10 times more than it takes in as deposit. That is what they call that the banks create money. Create money for those who are looking for money. That is why the banks could really flood the European real economy with money, because they had the power to create money out of nothing. It was not the savings of the European population which was the basis for those huge loans which were issued by the big banks and the small ones too. No, it was this fractional banking, which is really one of the most vicious financial innovations. It came into being in 1913, when in the United States the Federal Reserve was established, but then it became contagious, came over to Europe, particularly in the 1970s, became so general, and the result is the indebtedness without any limit. Now, where we are now? You know the Greek problem, and the Irish and the others, but these countries could have never been in so much debt if they were not part of the euro, because it is the interest of the major countries of the eurozone, basically Germany and France, to keep interest rate very low. But that is good for the companies to borrow and develop and grow for the big corporations. But since the European is the monetary zone, then that very low interest rate applies to Greece just as much as it applies to Germany. And that really encouraged people to borrow to the hilt as much as they could, and that's why the Greeks and others borrowed so much and not in that. So the joint level of rate of interest is a major problem of the Eurozone. Now about Ireland, one important thing, because now we are discussing so much about government deficit. Now it's interesting, and we should keep in mind that government deficit could not, or not necessarily is the major problem. What happened in Ireland? Up until 2007, the government deficit of Ireland was about 40% of the GDP. Great, 40%. But then what happened? The government had to bail out the banks, taxpayers' money, and then the banks have no more problem, but the government that immediately increased to 100%. So it is not enough to keep government deficit down. It is essential that the economy as a whole should not be allowed to go into deep debt. So that's something which is not mentioned really in the media. They always talk about the government deficit, but that is not enough, because overnight things could happen, like in Ireland. And in Greece, or to some extent it happened also, but the Irish example is terrible. And in Hungary, for instance, now I am pretty worried that the same could happen, because the government is doing everything, and congratulations, that try to reduce deficit. But what happens if the multinationals or others increase their own deficit, and then the EU will come, oh, you should pay bail out those banks or whoever. Then the government deficit could jump to 100% again. So it is not enough to fight the government. It's very important, essential, but it is just one side of the fight against indebtedness. One must not permit the economy as a whole to go beyond a certain level of debt. Now, perfect. Now, in conclusion, now the past 2 weeks about, we can't read enough about Greece and Portugal. And finally, even the layman recognizes that really it is not about saving Greece. No. The real issue is saving the French and the German big banks. Because if Greece is bailed out, then the Greek government won't even see that money. That money immediately goes to the German and French banks, and then they are bailed out. And that is what really, that is the crux of the matter, and that is why the German and the French governments are fighting tooth and nail to see that, to try to cover up the situation, but they cannot. And the banks are reluctant, so reluctant to take any share of the losses. But why should the taxpayer pay the indulgence of the banks? And the banks should know the risk, what they involved in Greece, for instance. They should know. And anyway, if I understand, the European Union is based on the principle of the free market, and that everybody is responsible and should take responsibility in the market. So why did not the banks take responsibility for their own actions? Now, conclusion, the euro has a very shaky future, and most likely it won't, this is my personal opinion, that it won't survive this crisis because the major governments in the Eurozone are reluctant to make the necessary financial and monetary changes and economic changes which would help the euro to survive. What they are doing is a patchwork, doing this, doing that. Now they are calling about restructuring and talking about general refocusing and whatnot, but they avoid treating the euro problem head on. Now that is bad and not good for the future of Europe. Thank you. Sorry for the...
Thank you very much, and you see that you are the next.
Okay, good. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. It will be quite a chance to effectively remain in the 15 minutes of time, but I will try. So what I did was to prepare a small PowerPoint presentation, so hoping that the speech will be somewhat more easier to follow. As you know, as Karoly presented me, I'm working at the European Trade Union Confederation, which is a union of all the different trade unions all over Europe. We claim to represent 60 million workers, and we're about 70 or 80 different trade unions that are affiliated to us at the EDC. We are in Brussels, and we try to represent the case of trade unions and workers towards the Commission, towards European Parliament, the Council, European politics as such. So that's in a nutshell, that's the ETUC. It's also interesting to know, I think. Let me now turn to the subject at hand, because I would like to start by saying that we at the ETUC are facing a kind of existential crisis. We often say that it's no coincidence that there's an E in our abbreviation of ETUC, European. We're very much in favor of Europe, of European integration, and so on. So throughout the years, the ETUC has been very supportive of the European idea. What we are observing now is that, well, from our point of view, Europe has been completely turned upside down. Here on the slide you can see what I'm referring to. This is the old quote from Jacques Delors saying no one can love the market, meaning that, okay, let's build the European market, but let's have a social Europe also to correct the competition. And of course that was all these years music in the ears of the ETUC, because it meant, okay, we accept European economic market integration, but we will get the social Europe as a compensation for it. So that was the old social deal, of which the ETUC was and still is part of the deal. If you look at the political slogan of today, well, that slogan is to say we need to save the single currency, and to save the single currency, let's cut wages, let's press working conditions down, let's forget about social Europe. I'm not exaggerating, this is something, well, it wasn't said exactly in that way, but Commissioner Andor, some weeks ago in a European meeting in Brussels, in the European Parliament, before the Social and Democratic group, raised the question, isn't there a choice to be made between the single currency and social Europe? That was a question he raised. I will tell you about some of the answers from that group. There was someone who stepped in the trap and said, no, we have to keep the single currency. So forgetting about the rest. But anyway, that is a little bit the political situation the ETUC is in at this moment. How did we get into this mess? Greece, Portugal, Ireland, the future of the single currency threatened, wages, trade unions being attacked throughout the whole of Europe. Well, I think one needs to go back to the basic principle, and it has been said before by the other speakers, that a monetary union needs an economic union. If you share a single currency, you can't have a situation in which one part of the union, one set of countries is doing that kind of policy, and another set of the union is doing completely different kind of policies. If you do that, if you create different economic situations inside your monetary union, and you have your one single interest rate, one single monetary policy, then you are asking for problems. Well, this basic principle has not been respected. All of us have joined the single currency, but different politics have been applied. And well, you can say that, to explain it a little bit more, you can say that on the basis of identical statistics, you can actually tell two completely different stories. These are statistics, wages, unit wage costs for different countries. Germany on the one hand, Austria is also similar to Germany, and then you have the peripheral countries on the other hand. 2000 is index 100, so it starts in 2000, or about the starting year of the monetary union. And well, you see that what Germany and to a lesser extent Austria did was to have a wage depression. This is the blue line at the bottom. So the unit wage costs in Germany over the whole of this decade actually barely went up. The blue line goes a little bit up in the crisis in 2008-2009, but this is the effect of Kurzarbeit. Now that line is coming back down again. Then look what happens, what has been happening with unit wage costs in the periphery. Well, they've increased to a cumulated index of around 30-35. So wage stagnation in Germany and a wage boom in the periphery. So these are the statistics. As said, there are two tales that can be told about this. The simple view is, or one tale is to say, well, this has all to do with competitiveness. In the periphery, because of large wage increases, the economy is no longer competitive. However, if you lose competitiveness, that means that you create an external deficit. An external deficit means an excess of imports over exports. The country as a whole is living beyond its means. But if you do that, you have to rent, you have to borrow, and you borrow abroad, of course. So you get a mix in which too high wage increases cause competitiveness losses, and these competitive losses induce countries to take up more loans, and so your external debt is being built. Of course, that can't go on forever. If you have a current account deficit each year of 10% of GDP, you have to borrow money abroad 10% each year, and that accumulates. So after 10 years, you are faced with a very high level of external debt, and then financial markets start to see that they've made a mistake, that they've lent you too much money, and then you have this sovereign debt crisis. So basically, this competitiveness view of these statistics is to say that in the end, it's not really the banks that have done so much things wrong. In the end responsibility is on wages. So that is one tale that is being told. The other tale that is being told, and it's a tale that is more modern and more in line with how the economy actually works, is to say, well, actually this enormous build-up of debt has nothing or not so much to do with wages that have exploded, but with wages that have been depressed. So let me try to explain this tale briefly. So at the core of this tale is to say, well, look at what has been going on in Germany. Germany, as you have seen on the slide, has pursued a systematic policy of depressing wages down. They've done so in all possible ways, by company opening clauses in sector level bargaining, so that at company level wages could be cut towards lower levels than the sector bargained wage level. They've done so by promoting agency work in a way that workers on agency contracts were paid 30 to 50% less than the regular normal worker. They've done so by forcing the unemployed to accept any kind of job, by actually subsidizing poverty wages. So people working at 40 euros an hour in Germany, and then the state pays a little bit more so that they can manage to live somewhat. But of course that completely pollutes the labor market and drives wages downwards. So wage depression in Germany, again, you can see this on the slide what has been happening. As said, the blue line is unit wage costs since 2000. Basically no change over the whole decade in unit wage costs in Germany. The red line is the wage evolution if Germany would have followed the price stability target of the ECB, so 2% unit wage cost increase each year. And well, you see the gap, you see how much wages have been depressed underneath this red line, which is the wage line that would have been compatible with a 2% price stability target. Now, how does this destabilize the euro area? So the first tale would say, well, it's through competitiveness, so German competitiveness has improved, perhaps to a certain extent, but a more important mechanism is what the previous speaker also alluded to. Because if you have wage depression in Germany, it also means that your inflation rate in Germany is going down. However, Germany is 1/5, 20% of the weight of the euro area. So what you have is a European Central Bank seeing its core member, the member it is thankful to the euro, because the euro is the follower of the German Deutschmark. So the ECB was seeing Germany going in a state of depression, going towards lower and lower levels of inflation, edging towards deflation. So the ECB had practically no other choice than to cut interest rates to a very low level and to keep them there to prevent Germany from entering depression, deflation. Of course, a single interest rate, the ECB's interest rate is a single interest rate. That was still too high for Germany. 2% was still too high for Germany given its economic situation, but it was actually too low for the periphery. Because in the periphery, you still had good growth going on. They got, on top of that, the presence of low interest rates. What happens when your incomes, your nominal incomes, increase by 4 or 5% a year and your interest rate is only 2%? People start to indebt themselves. That is the logical thing to do from an economic point of view. So if we're now looking at this enormous debt burden on the periphery, part of that responsibility, or a big chunk of that responsibility, has to do with the combination of the German wage depression strategy and the single interest rate of the ECB. And that is something that is completely ignored. No one is talking about that. Instead, what is being done is to say, well, it is poor bastards, poor Spanish workers that have had too much wage increases. Well, yes, they've had 30% nominal wage increase. In real terms, they also had zero, like the German workers, and they had to increase their wages because the economy was overheating through this indebtedness boom. So that's quite a different story to be told. That story is kind of illustrated in the following graphs. Let me simply comment on this graph. So the solid blue line that you see there is the ECB's interest rate, common for the whole euro area. And then you see the nominal growth rates of GDP for Spain, Greece, Ireland, and you see that from 2000 to 2007, 2008, nominal growth rates were very much higher than the single interest rate, which, as I explained, explains why the periphery has built this enormous debt burden. The debt burden is only part of the story, of course, or the debt burden goes together with asset price booms. Here on the right hand side of the graph, you see the increase in property prices in Spain compared to Germany, so no increase in housing prices in Germany because the interest rate was too high for Germany at that moment. But for Spain, you see the explosion in property prices.
It's hard to see on the thing. Can you darkness? I can't see the line.
Yeah, that's yeah. So I'll explain. If you take property prices in Spain in '98 and you set them at an index of 100, well, by 2007, that index has increased to 300. And so housing prices in Spain basically tripled over that period.
This is one, this is another one.
Yeah, so it's the right hand side, the right hand graph you have to look at. Okay? And so these are enormous figures, enormous explosions of property prices, but also of debt loads. That's the left hand graph. Again, if you put the debt load of the private sector in Spain at an index of 100 in 98, 99, well, at this moment, the debt load of these households and businesses is 2.5, so the debt load has more than doubled. As I've tried to explain, you have one set of figures, wage divergence, two tails around that, one tail competitiveness, the other tail the single interest rate effect combined with German wage compression leading to build-up of debt in the periphery. So that is kind of explaining what has been happening. Now let's take